Wyoming Territory, late spring of 1872. The wind howled low across the plains outside Laramie, kicking dust over the tracks of a woman walking away from everything she knew. Tessa Price's boots were worn near through, her dress hem ragged from days on foot. She carried a rifle slung across her back and a satchel over her shoulder, but no ring on her finger. Her eyes were sharp, tired, and distant. Behind her a burned-out cabin, a dead horse, and a past she refused to speak of. She reached the edge of the town by dusk. The sky was wide and pink with the setting sun, and smoke from cookfires drifted up in curling threads. She walked straight into the saloon without looking left or right, not for attention. Just for warmth, a drink, and a corner to sit in where no one would ask her name, but someone did. "You're bleeding," a man said, his voice low. Not like the others, not leering or curious, just calm, observant. Tessa looked down. Her arm was torn where a branch had caught her 2 days back. Dried blood cracked beneath her sleeve. "I'll live," she said, brushing past. He stepped aside, letting her pass. But his eyes lingered. Not in a way that made her stomach turn, in a way that made her pause just a step. Duston Dorsey, tall, quiet, mid-30s, with sun-beaten skin and a cowboy's posture, leaned back against the bar. He wore a trail coat and a revolver at his hip, but his hands rested easy at his sides. He did not follow her. He just watched. She took her corner, ordered whiskey, nursed it. The burn steadied her. That night she slept in the livery loft, curled beneath old horse blankets. The next morning, Dustin was waiting outside the stable, arms folded. "You got somewhere to go?" he asked. "No," she said, brushing hay from her sleeve. "You got someone looking for you?" "Not anymore." He studied her. "I need help on my ranch, small place, just me and 2 hands. Room in the bunkhouse, pays fair, you look like you can shoot." "I can," she said. "Then come on," he said. "You need work, I need someone who will not run their mouth." She hesitated, then nodded once. That was how it started. She rode out with him that morning, borrowed a horse, and worked harder than either of his ranch hands expected. She mucked stalls, carried feed, helped mend fence line, and kept to herself. She did not flinch from early mornings or cold water. She did not ask questions, and she did not smile. Dustin did not push her. He let her be, but he watched her like he was trying to understand something she had not said yet. One evening, 2 weeks into her staying on, they sat by the fire behind the bunkhouse. The stars were out. Coyotes called in the far dark. "You ever going to tell me what happened to your arm?" he asked, nodding to the scar healing there. "No." "Fair enough." Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable. She glanced at him. "You always taken strangers?" "No." "Just ones who look like they are hanging on by a thread." She looked away. "I had a husband," she said after a long while, "and 2 boys. Dustin stayed quiet, waiting. He left. Took our horse, what little money we had, and left the boys sleeping in bed. This was last winter. I woke up to cold silence. No firewood, no food, just them and me." Dustin's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "They got sick. I tried everything. I walked miles in snow. When I came back, my youngest he was cold." She stopped, swallowing hard. "The other one, Kellan, he's 5, he lived. He is with a widow north of here. I left him there because I had nothing to feed him. Nothing. I said I would come back, and I will." Dustin nodded slowly. "You will." She looked hard at him. "I am not good at loving, never was, not even with them. I do not know how to be soft. I do not know how to be what people need." He met her eyes. "Then let me show you how." The fire cracked between them. She blinked, surprised. "Why would you do that?" "Because you are still standing," he said simply. "And because you look at the world like it already gave up on you." But it didn't, not yet. Tessa did not answer, but she stayed beside him until the fire burned down to coals. The next day she worked harder. She did not speak of what she had said. But that night when he brought her coffee outside the bunkhouse, she took it without hesitation. Sat beside him again. Days passed. She started laughing just once when a goat chased one of the ranch hands into a trough. Dustin turned at the sound like it was something rare. She caught his look, and her smile faded, but not all the way. One afternoon, she found a small wooden horse carved from pine sitting on the edge of her bunk. It was rough, but shaped with care. She stared at it a long time. That evening, she found Dustin oiling his saddle. "You carve it?" she asked. "Yeah, for Kellan. I figured he would like it." She held it close to her chest. "Thank you," he nodded once. "You ready to go get him?" She swallowed. "I do not have the money yet." "You do," he said. "I already wired the widow. She said he is safe and I will ride with you." "We leave at dawn." Tessa looked like she might cry, but she did not. She just nodded once. That night she could not sleep. She sat by the fire again, alone. Dustin came out, handed her a blanket, and sat beside her. "You are not broken, Tessa," he said quietly. "You are just hurt." She turned to him. "I do not know how to love someone like you," she whispered. He leaned in slowly, not touching her, just close. "Then let me show you how," he said again. This time she let herself lean toward him, just a little, just enough. The road north wound through low hills and cottonwood stands, the trees just leafing out in the mild warmth of late spring. The air smelled of damp earth and horse sweat, and the sky held a stretch of pale blue that felt like a promise. Tessa rode beside Dustin, her borrowed mare steady beneath her. She didn't speak much, eyes fixed ahead, but her shoulders had dropped from the guarded stiffness she'd worn the month before. Dustin didn't press her. He let the silence spool out between them like line cast into deep water. When she was ready, she'd speak. They camped that night near a dried creek, the fire small and low. Dustin passed her a tin plate with beans and salt pork. She took it, nodding thanks. "You always live out this far?" she asked. "Since the war ended," he said. "Didn't care for cities." "Didn't care for people either for a time." She looked over at him, not prying, just listening. "Rode freight wagons out of Fort Kearney for a while," he went on. "Then started saving for land. Folks back east thought I'd gone off the map." "Did you?" He stirred the fire with a stick. "Maybe I did, but I found peace in it. Took time to stop jumping at shadows." She was quiet a moment. "I still jump," she said. "I know." The wind moved through the sage grass, whispering against their boots. She looked down at her hands, calloused now, more so than when she'd first come to his ranch. "Did you ever think about having a family?" she asked. His eyes stayed on the flames. "I did, once, before I knew what I'd come back from war carrying. Before I knew how long healing could take." Tessa nodded slowly. "I thought I was done with all that, thought the part of me that could trust someone had died." She didn't look at him, but he could see her jaw tighten in the firelight. "Then why'd you come with me?" he asked. She hesitated. "Because you didn't treat me like something to fix." Dustin watched her, brows drawn. "You just let me be," she said. "And I didn't know I needed that until it happened." He didn't answer right away. He just reached for the coffee pot, poured 2 tin cups full, and handed her one. They rode again at first light, the day warming fast. Dustin led them through a shallow stretch of river, the horses kicking up silver spray. On the other side, the land flattened into wide pasture broken by fences and smoke in the distance. By mid-afternoon, they reached the widow's homestead. A small house, whitewashed and neat, with laundry flapping on a rope and hens scratching in the dirt. A boy sat on the porch steps, legs swinging. He had Tessa's eyes. She dismounted slow. Her boots hit the ground like her knees might give. The widow came out, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked to Dustin, then to Tessa, and stepped aside without a word. The boy stood up, unsure, mouth parted. Tessa dropped to a crouch. "Kellan," she said, voice breaking. He ran to her. Dustin looked away, jaw clenched. She held the boy so tight it looked like she might never let go. That night, the widow gave them a place on the floor by the stove. Kellan curled up against Tessa, his small hand tucked into hers. She didn't sleep much. She sat with her back against the wall and watched him. Dustin stayed nearby, awake too, arms folded across his chest. At dawn, they packed what little the boy owned. The widow gave Tessa a jar of lard and a stitched blanket. No words passed between them. They rode south again, Dustin leading the way. Kellan sat in front of Tessa, wrapped in the blanket, head against her chest. She didn't speak all morning. It wasn't until they stopped to water the horses that she turned to Dustin. "He doesn't remember his brother," she said, voice flat. "Not really. I thought I'd feel relief. I just feel like there's a hole in the world." Dustin didn't answer. He crouched to refill the canteens, then looked up at her. "Sometimes the hole stays," he said. "You just learn how to live around it." She nodded once. Then she said, "He asked if you were my husband." Dustin didn't move. "What you tell him?" "That I didn't know." He stood slowly, wiping his hands on his trousers. "What do you want to tell him?" Tessa didn't answer for a long time. Kellan slept, his body slack against her. "I don't know how to ask for something without thinking it'll be taken away," she said. "But I want to try." Dustin stepped closer, his gaze steady. "Then try with me." She looked up at him, eyes rimmed with something raw and unguarded. "I'm still learning how to breathe without fear," she whispered. "Then let me walk beside you while you do," he said. She reached out, fingers brushing his. This time she didn't pull back. The path home ran slower. Dustin took the long way through the low western hills into Albany County, where the cattle grazed freely, and the land broke open in wide, golden stretches. He said little, but his decisions were deliberate, avoiding steep gullies, letting the horses pace themselves, stopping often enough that Kellan didn't tire too quick. Tessa rode quiet behind him, one hand resting lightly on her son's back. She wasn't used to thinking ahead in days. Until now, survival had only allowed her to think in hours. But as the ranch crept closer, a different ache had begun to settle behind her ribs, something like worry, though not for herself. By the time they reached Dustin's land again, the sun had dipped low and the wind had shifted east, bringing the scent of turned soil. The bunkhouse door hung open, and one of the ranch hands, Kennedy, a tall man with a crooked nose and a limp from a broken leg, long-heeled, stood with a dip of his hat. "I'll take the horses," he said, not looking at the boy. Tessa swung down first, then lifted Kellan gently from the saddle. The boy clung to her neck, half asleep. Dustin nodded toward the house. "You'll stay inside now. There's a room that gets the morning light. It's yours." Tessa glanced at him. "What about the bunkhouse?" "That was for someone passing through," he said. "You're not." Inside, the house smelled of pine soap and fresh bread. The stove still held warmth from earlier in the day, and a single oil lamp lit the main room. Dustin set the boy's little bundle of clothes near the corner bed, then stepped back. "He can have the room," Tessa said, voice low. "I can sleep on the floor." "It's yours too," Dustin said, not soft, just certain. She didn't argue. She tucked Kellan into the bed without fanfare, pulling the quilt over his small body. Only when his breathing deepened did she turn again. Dustin was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You built this house," she said. "I did. Every board, everyone." She ran her hand along the doorpost. "Why only one bedroom?" He looked at her. "Didn't think I'd need more." Her voice was quiet. "You do now." He stepped in slow. "You sure?" She nodded. "You said to let you show me." He reached gently, brushing a strand of hair from her brow. "I meant every word." Outside, the wind picked up. The lantern flickered. She didn't kiss him. Instead, she stepped into his arms and rested her head against his chest. His hand came to rest at the small of her back, steady and warm. They stood like that for a long time, the quiet between them no longer hollow, but filled with something solid. The next morning, Kellan followed Dustin out to the pasture, holding a piece of bread in one hand and squinting into the sunrise. Dustin showed him how to open the chicken coop without getting pecked and where to find the water pump handle. Tessa watched from the porch, arms wrapped around herself, not to guard, but to hold in something she wasn't sure how to name. That afternoon, she stitched a patch onto one of Kellan's shirts and hung it in the wind to dry. Dustin came up with a crate of seed potatoes slung under one arm. "We'll plant next week," he said. "If the frost holds off," she nodded. "I'll help." He set the crate down. "I figured you would, but I meant we together." She met his gaze. "You're not afraid of what I've lived through?" "No," he said. "I'm only afraid of not trying." She stepped toward him, slow. "I don't know what a life like this looks like yet. Then we'll learn together." That evening, she tucked Kellan in again, and Dustin waited on the porch, watching the sky turn lavender. When she joined him, she didn't speak. She just sat beside him, knees touching. He passed her a cup of coffee, still warm. "You think he'll be happy?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "He's got you." She looked down at her hands. "And you," Dustin turned to her. "I've got both of you." She leaned into him, and this time she did kiss him. Slow, sure, and without apology. The moon rose full over the horizon, and for the first time in years she believed the dark might not come back the same way again. By early June, the meadow behind the house had gone thick with green, and the chickens had taken to wandering further from their coop, scratching under the cottonwood for beetles. Kellan followed them with a stick in hand, not to hurt, just to herd. Tessa watched from the shade of the porch, her mending basket beside her. Though the shirt in her lap hung forgotten, Dustin stepped out from the barn with an armful of fence posts, his shirt clinging to his back. He paused at the trough, dipped a tin ladle, and drank deep. She studied the angle of his shoulders, the way he carried weight like it belonged to him. "You always work that hard?" she asked without rising. He glanced up, brushing his forehead with the back of his wrist. "Work keeps a man honest," she nodded, pushing a loose thread back into the basket. "I used to think work was just punishment." He set the posts down and crossed the yard, crouching beside the porch step, his voice low. "And now, I think I was wrong." A quiet passed between them, filled only by the chickens clucking near the well and Kellan's light footsteps in the grass. Dustin shifted his weight. "Kennedy says the north fence line's near gone. I can help mend it." He tilted his head. "You sure?" "I want to," she said. "I want to build something here." He didn't smile, just touched her knee through the fabric of her skirt, brief and sure. They rode out the next morning, the boy staying behind with Kennedy, who'd taken to whittling small things for him from scrap pine. Tessa wore Dustin's old trail hat against the sun and a canvas apron tied over her skirt. They rode in silence until the trees thinned and the land opened to the ridge. The fence was worse than Dustin had said, several posts sunk sideways, the wire slack and curled where snowdrifts had pulled it loose. He handed her gloves and they worked side by side, digging, setting, tamping. Midday, she sat back on her heels, wiping sweat with her sleeve. "I used to think I'd spend my whole life in someone else's house," she said. "Doing what someone else wanted, surviving, not choosing." Dustin pressed a post into place, his grip steady. "You're choosing now." She looked at him, the ridge wind tugging her hair loose. "I still feel like I'm trespassing in my own life." He tapped the earth firm around the post, then met her gaze. "You're not. You've got every right to be here." She swallowed, then stood. "When we finish this line, I want to put a gate in, one that swings both ways." "Why?" he asked, brushing dirt from his trousers. "Because I never had a way to leave before. I want Kellan to know he can walk through a door, not be shoved." Dustin nodded once. "We'll build it." That evening, she found him on the porch, mending a bridle with careful hands. She brought 2 mugs, one for him, one for herself. He leaned back, taking the drink. "Kennedy said the boy asked about the war. What you tell him?" "That it was a long time ago and I don't talk much about it." She sat beside him, pulling her legs beneath her. "You ever think you'll be rid of it?" "No," he said, "but it doesn't run me anymore." She traced the rim of her mug. "I wonder if I'll ever stop feeling like a storm might come back." He turned to her, his voice quiet. "You don't have to outrun it, just don't face it alone." Her fingers stilled, then she leaned into him, resting her temple against his shoulder. "I think I'm beginning to understand," she said. He set the bridle aside, his arm coming around her, warm and certain. "When you said, 'Let me show you how,' I didn't know what that meant," she whispered. "And now, it means showing up, staying, being kind even when it's hard." He pressed his lips to her hair. "It means choosing each other every day." She closed her eyes. "Then I choose you." Dustin held her there as the sky turned lavender. Inside, Kellan's voice rose in a half-sung rhyme, off-key in content. The fences stood straight under the moonlight, and the gate they hadn't built yet waited in her mind, open both ways but leading home. July brought heat that clung to the skin and turned the dirt roads into fine powder. By midday, flies hummed thick around the corral and the scent of sweat and sun-warmed leather hung in the air. Tessa stood with one boot braced on the fence rail, watching Dustin work a fresh gelding through its paces in the round pen. The horse was young, sharp-eyed, and prone to sudden stops, but Dustin's patience never wavered. He moved in slow circles, rope loose in his hand, voice low and steady. Kellan sat on the porch behind her, whittling a stick with a butter knife under Kennedy's eye. The old ranch hand had taken to teaching him how to shape things from wood, nothing fancy, just simple forms that fit in a boy's pocket. Tessa glanced back now and then, but her eyes kept returning to Dustin. After the gelding finally settled and took a few obedient steps, Dustin approached the animal, resting a hand on its neck. Then he looked over at her and gave a single nod, not triumph, just quiet satisfaction. She stepped down from the fence and met him at the gate. "You always talk to them like that?" she asked, taking the rope from his hand. "Animals don't lie," he said, wiping the sweat from his brow with a bandana. "You give them time, they'll show you what they need." She ran a hand down the horse's flank. "You think people work the same way? I think the ones worth knowing do." They walked the horse back together, their arms brushing now and again. She didn't pull away. That evening, the table inside the house filled with more than just bread and beans. Tessa had traded preserves with a neighbor woman for a side of cured ham and dug wild onions from the edge of the pasture. Kellan tucked into the meal with a hunger that only came from honest work and sun. Dustin didn't say much, but his eyes flicked to Tessa more than once. The corners creased in a way that hadn't been there before. Afterward, when Kellan had fallen asleep against a folded quilt near the stove, Tessa stepped out into the yard, the warm air still holding the scent of pine smoke and sage. Dustin followed, his boots soundless on the packed earth. She didn't look at him right away. "I got a letter from the circuit schoolteacher," she said. "She'll be riding through next month, asked if I'd help teach the younger ones." "Would you want to?" "I'd like to try," she said. "I think I'd be good at it." He stood beside her, arms crossed loosely. "You would?" "I never thought I'd want anything again," she said. "Not after losing so much, but I do. I want to belong somewhere. I want this to be home." He didn't answer with words. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small pouch wrapped in cloth. When he handed it to her, his hand was steady. She opened it slowly. Inside was a plain silver ring, not polished, not ornate, just solid and true. "I haven't got a preacher lined up," he said, "and I ain't much for speeches, but I know what I want." Tessa stared at the ring, then at him. "You sure?" "I've been sure since you set your rifle down and stayed," he said. "I don't need a ceremony to know you're mine, but I'd like to stand beside you and call you wife if you'll let me." She closed the cloth and held it tight in her fist. Her voice cracked just once. "Yes." His shoulders loosened, and he cupped her cheek with a hand rough from rope and reins. She leaned into it, eyes closed, and let herself feel what she'd held back so long, peace, and the quiet certainty of being claimed not with force but with love. They married the following Sunday under the cottonwood tree behind the house. Kennedy carved a bench for the occasion, and the neighbor woman brought sweetbread. The preacher came up from Laramie on a borrowed mule, dust on his coat and a cracked Bible in his hand. Tessa wore her mother's shawl. Kellan stood between them, holding both their hands. The vows were simple. The words didn't matter half as much as the way Dustin looked at her when he said them. Afterward, they shared coffee and apple pie in the yard while the afternoon stretched golden and slow. That night, after Kellan had fallen asleep in the room they now all shared, Tessa stood at the open window, watching the stars blink into place. Dustin came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I never thought I'd have this," she said. "Not again." He kissed the side of her neck, slow and certain. "You have it now," he said, "for as long as you want it." She turned in his arms, both hands resting on his chest. "I want it for the rest of my life." He leaned his forehead against hers. "Then that's what we'll have," and they did. They planted a garden that summer, rows of beans and carrots and squash that Tessa taught Kellan to weed with careful hands. She took up teaching when the circuit rider came through, and the children from scattered ranches gathered once a week beneath the cottonwood tree with slates and chalk. Dustin built a second room onto the house before the first frost, hammering late into the evenings by lantern light. When the wind turned sharp, they gathered close inside, firelight flickering on the walls, their laughter soft but full. Years passed. Kellan grew tall and sure-footed, with his mother's eyes and Dustin's quiet strength. The ranch held through hard winters and dry summers, and the fences stood straight. Tessa never forgot what she'd lost. But she built a life that honored it, a life rooted in soil, in trust, in the slow, steady work of love. She was never afraid again. Not with Dustin's hand in hers and the morning sun spilling across the land, they'd made their own.